Good morning or good afternoon, class. Mr. Long here. It's been quite some time since we've done a video lecture. So today we are going to focus on Napoleon Bonaparte's three major mistakes that he makes as leader of France. And hopefully, you guys picked up on a couple of these mistakes as you guys did your slides presentation. You did a little bit of research on him. Previously, with the substitute, you guys read a section on Napoleon and his achievements and all the good things that he did for France when he took over as leader of France at the end of the French Revolution. Now, at the time, guys, France was in destruction, it was in chaos. It just went through over a decade of revolution, and they needed a good, strong leader to come in and take over and to make France great again. And that's exactly what Napoleon does. So, on this slide that you guys are looking at right now, it's important to write down these achievements and to listen to this lecture on this slide because this is going to set us up for his mistakes and the stuff that he does to France. It eventually leads to his downfall. So, a couple things that we need to mention about Napoleon and the good things that he does when he takes over France. Number one, being an efficient or a good way to collect taxes. And he's going to use the money that he gets from the taxes to make France better. Now, if you guys mention or if you guys remember before when the French Revolution broke out under the old regime, um, the tax system was very unfair. Um, the taxes were going to be left up to the third estate or the bourgeoisie, the city workers, the peasants. They were going to be forced to pay all the taxes. And the first and second estate, which is the rich nobility and the clergy, the church members, were not responsible to pay for any taxes, even though they were wealthy and they were rich and they owned a lot of land. So Napoleon's going to come in, he's going to look at the old ways and he's going to change it. Everyone's going to be responsible for paying their taxes. And then what's going to end up happening is that that tax money is going to be used to build better roads, to build better buildings, to build infrastructure for France, just to make France better. He also is going to set up a national banking system. He's going to make the economy strong. Um, they're going to rely on the national banks rather than rely on taxes. So, one more thing that he's doing for the economy that's going to make France better. He's also going to come in, he's going to end the corruption in the government. Now, before, government officials are going to be appointed because of who they are and the people that they know and because of the family that they are born into. And of course, Napoleon is going to end this. He is going to set up what is known as lycées. And lycées are government run schools. And graduates of these lycées are going to be appointed to public office jobs based on their merit. And merit has to do with how good of a job they can actually do rather than their family connections. So now you're going to get a job based off of how qualified you are and how good of a job you can do rather than who you know and what family that you are born into and how much money you have. Now, just because you have money, that doesn't mean that you can do a good job. So, Napoleon is going to change the whole idea of government officials and how you get that job. Napoleon is also going to have a very good relationship with the Catholic Church. He's going to sign what is known as a concordat with the Pope, and the concordat is an agreement. So now Napoleon, which would represent the state, is going to be buddy buddies or friends with the church. So before, under the French Revolution, we've mentioned before how the church and the state are no longer going to be separated. The government is going to run the church. Well, in this case, when Napoleon takes over, he's going to have a good relationship with the church. And in return, he is going to gain a lot of followers. A lot of people that belong to the Catholic Church are going to like Napoleon. So his power now is going to increase. It's going to get um, bigger. Okay. Now, one of his biggest or greatest accomplishments that he does in France is he creates what is known as the Napoleonic Code. And this is a uniform set of laws that everyone has to follow. Uniform meaning universal. Everyone has to follow these laws. No one is above the law, regardless of how much money you have. Um, so everyone has to follow these rules and laws in France according to the Napoleonic Code that Napoleon makes. Um, but unfortunately, for the citizens, for the people, the Napoleonic Code, it's going to take away some of the individual freedoms. It's going to take away some of the individual rights, but it's going to promote order and authority, and it will protect the citizens. Something that they were lacking and that they were missing for the last decade during the French Revolution. Another thing that he does for the French economy was that he sells the Louisiana Territory to the U.S. and to President Jefferson for $15 million. Now, this does a couple things. France still needs money. France has a huge debt problem, and France owns and controls a lot of land in North America. Now, this land in North America will give the United States at the time a lot more power if the United States can get this land. And what it actually does is that it doubles the size of the United States. So this is a good deal for the United States, and this is also a good deal for France. Um, when this deal goes down, Napoleon gets $15 million for the Louisiana Territory. And this allows him to continue his European operations that he's doing in Europe. It continues to finance his wars that he's fighting, and it makes the French economy better. And it's almost like a slap in the face to Great Britain. He's punishing Great Britain. Remember, France and Great Britain are arch rivals. They don't like each other. They're constantly battling against each other, and this is almost just to upset Great Britain. So for multiple reasons, but most importantly, to get money for France and to help them get out of the debt. So once again, guys, please review and please write down these achievements. You're going to need to know these for their next quiz. But moving on to Napoleon's three major mistakes that he makes that will lead eventually to his downfall. Number one being the Continental System. Now, the Continental System was a strategy that Napoleon comes up with. I just mentioned earlier that France and Great Britain are arch rivals. They don't like each other. And Napoleon in France is trying to figure out a way to collapse the British economy, to bankrupt the British economy. And he develops what is known as the Continental System. And what the Continental System is, if you take a look at the map, is that it's a blockade between Great Britain and the rest of Europe. Now, a blockade means nothing can get into Great Britain and nothing can leave Great Britain. Now, if you import goods, that means you are bringing goods into the country. If you are exporting goods, that means you are sending goods out of the country. So if you stop import and export goods coming in and out of Great Britain, that means you are stopping trade. And if you stop trade in Great Britain, eventually business will stop. And when business stops, Great Britain's economy will collapse and it will fail. So that is what his strategy is to prevent all trade and communication with Great Britain. This also is going to do another thing. It's going to force other European countries that were so dependent on Great Britain and the goods coming from Great Britain to become self-sufficient, meaning to rely on themselves and become more of an independent country rather than relying on Great Britain. Now, once again, he does this to destroy the economy. And if he can destroy the economy, he can make Great Britain weak. Eventually, Napoleon and France can invade Great Britain, attack Great Britain, and defeat them and take over. And that's his grand scheme. That's what he eventually wants to do. But he has to weaken the economy first. The results of the Continental System, unfortunately, did not quite work out to Napoleon's liking. Because what's going to end up happening is that you're going to have smugglers, and a smuggler is someone who sneaks goods in and out of a country, and you're going to have tons and tons of smugglers that are bringing goods in and out of Great Britain. Even Napoleon's allies, his friends, his buddies, and even relatives that run European countries did not follow this blockade because they would lose business also. If they stop trading with Great Britain, they lose business. And when they lose business, they also lose money. So his own friends and family were not following this continental system. As a result, though, of less goods coming in and out of Great Britain needed to figure out a way to still get money because they were losing business, on their import and export goods. So what the British Navy did was they began to stop neutral ships. Now, a ship that is neutral means that it's not on anyone's side. And excuse me, the United States was a neutral country. And the United States, of course, did business with Europe and European countries on a daily basis. They sailed across the Atlantic Ocean with goods. And what ended up happening was Great Britain would stop these U.S. ships, and they would force the U.S. ships to pull into a British port. They would search the goods, and then they would tax the goods. Now, this occurs in 1812. And the Americans have flashbacks to the Revolutionary War. Once again, the British attempting to tax Americans on goods when they don't have a right to do that. So the Americans have flashbacks of the Revolutionary War. And immediately this leads to the War of 1812 between the US and Great Britain. So moving away from the Continental System, we're going to move on to Napoleon's second major mistake that he makes, which leads to his downfall. And this was the Peninsular War, which lasted for about 6 years, from 1808 to 1814. And the Peninsular War was a war that was fought between France and Spain. Now, originally, Portugal, which borders Spain, if you guys can see right here on the map, here is Portugal, here is Spain, and then top right is France. Portugal was not following the continental system, and they were continuing to trade with Great Britain. So what ended up happening was that France sent troops through Spain to get to Portugal in order to kind of force Portugal to follow this continental system. And the Spanish king did not like this. And what ends up happening is that the Spanish king rebels. And the Spanish king is going to be replaced with Napoleon's brother Joseph. So now Napoleon's brother Joseph becomes king of Spain. And immediately the Spanish people rebel. And they're scared. And they don't like the fact that Napoleon's brother Joseph is now king of their country, because they saw what has happened in the past with France and the church and the treatment of the church by the French. And they were devout Catholics. They were very religious. And this is going to lead to a huge, huge war between France and Spain. And what ends up happening is the French lose, and the French lose badly. The French are fighting in Spain, which means Spain is fighting a defensive war. Spain knows their own land, which is a huge advantage for them. France is fighting on enemy territory, and they don't know the land like the Spanish do. So what ends up happening is that you're going to have small groups of Spanish peasants, and these small groups of Spanish peasants are called guerrillas. And they are going to group up in very small groups, and they are going to surprise attack the French. And this strategy works very, very well for the Spanish, and that is going to result in a loss of over 300,000 French troops. And this is going to be very devastating to the French. Uh, so, once again, this is a war fought between Spain and France, which France loses very badly. Finally, our third mistake, and this is actually Napoleon's biggest mistake that he makes, and this is the invasion of Russia. So obviously, this is going to be a war that is fought between France and Russia. Guys, hopefully, we're picking up the idea that Napoleon and France like to fight. They like land, and they have no problem going to war with other countries to gain that land and to gain that power. But unfortunately, if you take a look at this picture, and we've mentioned this before, Russia is not a country that you want to invade. They have millions and millions of people. Russia is very, very big. And in the wintertime, it gets freezing below zero. And it's not a good time to fight, especially if you are not used to that weather and you are not used to the land like the French were. So the question is, why? Why was there an invasion of Russia by the French? Well, if you guys can remember back to the Continental System, Napoleon did not want any European countries to trade with Great Britain at all. But these European countries continue to trade with Great Britain because if they did not, they would also lose out on business, which means they would also lose out on money. And Russia was one of those countries. Russia continued to sell grain to Great Britain, which broke this continental system. Napoleon finds out about this since France and Russia supposedly were allies. They're supposed to be friends. But France and Napoleon find out what Russia is doing, kind of going behind Napoleon's back. He gets upset about this and he declares war and invades Russia. Not only does that happen, but both countries, Russia and France, have their eyes on Poland. And Poland is in Eastern Europe. And Poland is a country that both those countries want. So at this point, France will invade Russia. And when France invades Russia, they go in with 420,000 French troops. But when they leave with only 10,000 troops. So for France, this is absolutely devastating. They lose over 400,000 troops. In the previous years in the Peninsular War with Spain, they lost over 300,000. So that is over now 700,000 soldiers that France has lost in the previous years. The Russians, we'll talk about this quite a bit this year when we talk about World War I. But the Russian soldiers are going to practice something that is known as the scorched earth policy. And this is when they burn down their own grain fields. The Russians burn down their own grain fields. And the Russians also slaughter all their livestock. Once they have done that, they will retreat, which means they turn around and they run. They go backwards. Now, think about the purpose of the Russians destroying all the grains and slaughtering all the animals, the livestock. Answers for one reason. The French soldiers will not be able to live off the land. The French soldiers will starve to death because there is no food, because the food has all been destroyed by the Russians. So what ends up happening is that the French soldiers, especially during wintertime, starve to death. That is why they are so badly beaten. That is why they lose over 400,000 troops in Russia. So that will go ahead and conclude today's lecture. Please go back if you need to. Make sure that you write down all of the bullet points that you see on each slide, and also please add any notes that are worth adding with this lecture something that I might have talked about, but not necessarily written down as a bullet point.